Here, once more, we seek the blurry mirage of universal borders. So let us, in this chapter, in our attempts and efforts to find something tangible, let us look at the myriad of ways in which a self can be interrupted by the physical, and then let us further dissect what this tells us about the self of our experience.
Good morrow, fellow humans. My name is Sean, and I am obsessed with infinity. So join me as I attempt to unpick the infinities of what is. We all tend to assume that, at very least, our own personal and private understanding of the self should be, for lack of a better word, correct. As if it were in alignment with some fundamental truth. Because at whatever stage of life this self may be, the path followed has always been one of our own design, determined by the choices and actions of this self. No one knows who we are better than we do ourselves, right? But as discussed in our story concerning Soldier Pink Moss, identifying the decision maker is not always so easy. And the more we look, the more evident this identity crisis becomes. Mental disruptions by way of tumours, psychosis, and diseases like Alzheimer's, or even unseen external influences, all offer examples of how easily the ownership of self can be jeopardized. A single-celled parasite known as toxoplasmosis is one such external influence. This miraculous creature has evolved the remarkable ability to influence the mind of its host. Though found in many warm-blooded animals, it commonly finds residence within mice and rats. The curious effect this parasite has over its victim is revealed when the mice begin to show changes in their behaviour. They become less fearful and more likely to take risks. As a result, one by one, these poor mice out in the open with the bravado of an African lion inevitably get caught and eaten by cats. An act that may at first seem disastrous for the parasite, but cunningly, all that results is a more luxurious, cat-sized lodging. You may have also seen similar approaches taken by certain fungi that turn ants into zombies so as to catch themselves a free flight on the next opportunistic bird. But what you may not know is that you personally have a 1 in 3 chance of being infected by toxoplasmosis, as somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the human population are currently infected. And though studies are still underway, it's also theorized that these traits of fearlessness transition to us higher mammals just as effectively. But rather than being eaten by cats, this slight edge towards fearlessness may result in a high-speed collision or perhaps a successful business venture. Either way, the question remains: how do we know what is us and what is the parasite? And even if we knew we were infected, would we even want for such a thing to be removed? Though we take the ownership of our self-identity very seriously, its state seems very much at the whim of physical chance. Following 2010, both my mother and sister were independently diagnosed and successfully treated for brain tumours. The difference in how they were affected primarily resulted from where each tumour was located. My mother's was located at the rear of the brain, surrounding neural pathways that connect distance representation with spatial memory. And though she quickly recovered, shortly after the surgery, she found herself forgetting how to navigate familiar spaces. Occasionally, she might fresh air a familiar step or forget what the appropriate course of action is when walking towards a wall until it was too late, which I'm sure we're all agreed isn't funny at all. whereas my sister, whose operation had taken place behind the eyes, on the optic nerve beside the prefrontal cortex, experienced a minor but permanent shift in her personality. In her own words, her experience of the world just became more black and white, a shift from the lateral towards the literal. Subtle humour or between-the-lines phrasing were no longer grasped intuitively, and this, in parallel with a reduction of a once feisty nature, did for some time make simple things like small talk a much more laborious endeavour. But importantly, unto herself, she still always feels like herself. Though the emotional lens of self may have shifted, her self-identification has never deterred. Our moment-to-moment belief that we are the one and the same I that started our story seems to the individual as unshakable. I think, therefore I am. I must be real because not only can I remember being me, but I'm experiencing it right at this very moment. This experience, this moment, it must be true. However, there are countless records of people waking from comas and other cases of brain trauma, not only with new traits or behaviours, but with entirely new identities, each with a complete set of false memories and backstories, eradicating the familiarity of old friends and family. There's even a syndrome that can result from left hemisphere damage called acquired savant syndrome, which leaves individuals with extraordinary scholarly skills. Be it mathematics, music, art, the sciences, or language, patients can become entirely fluent from a starting point of practically zero knowledge. But if physical trauma can etch new psychological selves into our physical, does this not then reveal to us an underlying truth about the nature of self? Perhaps even a terrifying truth. That the self of our experience is no more than a story told by the brain to the mind. A story that includes the existence of the mind itself. A mind that, regardless of evidence, will always believe its story. Terrifying because, as we know, the brain lies. A procedure developed in the 1960s shows this trait firsthand. Still in practice today, this amazingly dramatic procedure is practiced for the purpose of alleviating the severity of epileptic seizures. In studies led by neuropsychologist, neurobiologist Roger Sperry, it was shown that seizures could be kept to a minimum if the spreading misfiring neurons were contained to just one side of the brain. To achieve this, patients participated in a surgery that literally had their brain split in two. This cutting of the corpus callosum worked as a type of neural firebreak, removing the bridge that ties our two hemispheres together. As reported by patients and when viewed from the outside, these operations seemed by and large a success. But Sperry's discoveries were soon to open a perspective of the self entirely unexpected. After the recovery period, patients would report situations where, upon getting dressed, they would, as usual, decide on an outfit, reach out with their right hand, and take the chosen garment, only to have their left hand step in and also select its preferred item of clothing. And though patients knew in themselves that this wasn't right, it now appeared that two separate selves were governing their bodies, each unconcerned and, for the most part, unaware of the preferences held by the other. Due to contralateral control, each hemisphere governs the body's opposite side. So, for example, the left brain controls the right arm and vice versa, with each side attributing its own unique set of abilities. The following 3 tests in which split brain patients participated show how our mind is less of an individual and more of a delicate balance between these varied mental abilities. Test 1 involved blindfolding patients and placing objects in their hands. As the left hemisphere is the only one of the two that retains the power of speech, subjects were fully capable of verbally identifying the item held in their right hand. But when asked to identify what was in their left, they couldn't say. But where things got weird was when they were asked to use their left hand to draw this unknown item, which they could do, even though none could explain why they had chosen that particular item to draw. When asked, patients would either state that they didn't know, or more often, create a false memory to justify some story that could account for it. Equally, if patients removed their blindfold, the left hand could pick the item from a lineup, whereas the verbally gifted right couldn't. This same hemisphere independence was revealed again in their vision due to the eye's ability to send equal amounts of left and right information to the relevant side of the visual cortex. In split-brain patients, this visual information is smuggled to its opposing side via an unsevered pathway called the optic chasm. In the test, patients were required to focus on a dot in the centre of a screen until an image flashed on either side. As the image only remained on screen for a moment, patients had no time to shift their focus, thus restricting all peripheral information to the correlated hemisphere. And like the objects in the hand, patients could only verbalise what they saw on the right, but only draw or write what they saw on the left. Where right brain wins out over left is that it's the only one of the two that can recognise faces. This was demonstrated in the third and final test, where patients were shown paintings by the 16th century painter Giuseppe Arcimboldo, famous for painting works of simple household items like fruit or books that have a face reflected within the composition. Patients with their chatty left brain could only state that they saw books and fruit, whereas the right brain, by way of the left hand, could communicate the presence of a hidden face. Sperry's discoveries have had far-reaching consequences, as they showcase a quality of hemisphere independence that is present within us all. Behind the curtain, unbeknown to the audience that is the eye, works a cast of players, each responsible for their key roles, sometimes out front, sometimes backstage, sometimes stepping up as understudies to fill in for disastrous unforeseen dropouts, all so that our conscious eye can experience the flawless performance that we call the self. Even with such bizarre side effects, patients still report minimal interruptions to their daily lives because the show must go on. Left brain simply goes on lying to itself, confidently justifying all of right brain's unexpected impulses. Because as far as any were concerned, just as it was with my sister, all were still themselves. But who then is it, sitting silently in the neighbouring hemisphere? Another I? The answer appears to be yes. Two self-appointed eyes, each as happy to disregard the other, just as we happily disregard the many schisms of our own psyche. And so, as the empirical evidence rolls in, time and again, in sickness and health, it appears that our experiences, interpretations, and identities are nothing more than the results of this physically influenceable biological machine, making it all the more reasonable to think that the self, thus far sought, may indeed be a purely physical entity. The modern acceptance of materialism is beginning to make a lot of sense. But though the idea of self as a purely physical construct seems to align with the results of these experiments, we can still challenge this newfound faith with some further philosophical probing. For example, it gives credence to the idea that with enough technical prowess, one should be able to remap an entire human brain, and in doing so, acquire the ability not only to store the experience, but to replicate it. This opens up many questions about the nature of self that we too must soon dive into. But before we get too carried away with the philosophical, let us just first find our next shoreline in understanding. What level of fidelity have we achieved in our house of the brain? And how close are we to digitally replicating a human mind? Well, as one may suspect, in this era of exponential development, such a task is already underway. And so this is where we're going to pick up next time in the second half of this chapter, The Shifting Self, Part 2.
Good morrow, friends. Thank you so much for listening. This week we did have an extended chapter. It went on a little bit longer, so I did make the call to do half this week, and then the next half is going to come up in the next episode. So unfortunately, you're going to have to wait just a little bit longer to get the tail end of this episode. To keep you entertained in the short term, next week we'll be doing the visualization for this. That'll be going up on our YouTube as per norm, and I'll see you the week after that. Apart from that, good morrow, much love, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful week. See ya.